The silver chain gleamed in the firelight as Conrad Voss pressed the blade against Lucy's throat, her small body trembling in his grip. Ethan Mercer's hand hovered over his revolver, every muscle coiled tight. One wrong move and the 4-year-old would die. Outside, frozen wind screamed across the Texas frontier, but inside that ranch house, time stopped. This was the moment everything would either break or be reborn. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how a broken widower and 2 starving children ended up in a standoff with the most dangerous man in 3 counties, we need to go back. Back to the night Ethan kicked open that abandoned shack and found something he thought he'd lost forever, a reason to fight. If you want to know whether Ethan saves Lucy, whether justice finds Conrad Voss, and how a man who buried his heart learns to love again, stay with me until the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind came down from the north like a living thing that wanted you dead. Ethan Mercer pulled his coat tighter and kept riding, though every sensible part of him screamed to turn back. February in the Texas frontier didn't forgive mistakes, and being out here alone after dark was a mistake that could leave you frozen in a ditch by morning. But the cattle weren't going to find themselves, and he'd already lost 3 head to this storm. 3 head meant 3 months of work gone, meant the difference between eating regular and rationing through spring. He'd been tracking hoof prints for the better part of 2 hours when he saw the shack. It sat crooked against the hillside like a drunk leaning on a wall, half collapsed and forgotten. Ethan had passed it before, years back, but never paid it much mind. Nobody had lived there since old Jeremiah Watts died, and that was better part of a decade ago. The place should have been empty, dark, dead. But there was smoke coming from the chimney, thin smoke, barely visible against the black sky, but smoke all the same. Someone had a fire going in there. Ethan reined his horse to a stop and sat there a moment, weighing his options. Could be drifters. Could be trouble. Could be someone just as desperate and cold as he was. Could be none of his business. He should have kept riding, should have tracked his cattle and left whatever was happening in that shack to sort itself out. The frontier taught you early that sticking your nose in other people's problems was a quick way to catch a bullet, or worse. Ethan had learned that lesson the hard way, more than once. But something pulled at him. Maybe it was the wrongness of it. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant someone was burning the last scraps of wood in a place that should have run out of burnable things years ago. Maybe it was the wind, howling like it was trying to warn him. Or maybe it was just that Ethan was tired of riding past things and pretending he didn't see them. He dismounted and tied his horse to a dead cottonwood branch, drew his revolver, approached slow. The door hung loose on broken hinges, and when Ethan kicked it open the rest of the way, the cold rushed in ahead of him like it had been waiting. Inside was darkness, cut through with the weak orange glow of a fire that was more embers than flame. The smell hit him next. Unwashed bodies, sickness, something rotten he couldn't quite place. Then he saw them. 2 little girls huddled together on the floor near the dying fire. Couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, both of them. Identical faces, identical tangled dark hair, identical hollow eyes that turned toward him when the door banged open. Twins, dressed in rags that might have been nightgowns once, but were now just filthy strips of cloth doing nothing against the cold. One of them was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The other one just stared at him, too weak even for that. Jesus Christ, Ethan breathed and holstered his gun. He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to one knee beside them. Up close it was worse. The shaking one had a fever. He could feel the heat radiating off her before he even touched her skin. The other one's lips were cracked and bleeding, her breathing shallow. They were dying. Maybe hours away, maybe less. "Who left you here?" Ethan said, but his voice came out rougher than he meant. "Where's your mama?" The one without the fever, her eyes were clearer, sharper, looked up at him with an expression that was too old for her face. "You have to save Nora," she whispered. "Please. She's burning up, and I can't make it stop." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Ethan felt something twist in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He looked at the other girl, Nora, and saw her eyes were only half open, rolling back. She didn't have hours. She might not have minutes. "What's your name?" Ethan asked the first girl. "Lucy." "All right, Lucy, I'm going to get you both out of here, but I need you to stay with me." Can you do that? She nodded, but barely. She was running on fumes, same as her sister. Ethan pulled off his coat and wrapped it around Nora first, lifting her into his arms. She was light as a bird, all bones and fever heat. Lucy struggled to her feet, swaying, and Ethan caught her with his free arm. "Hold on to me," he said. She grabbed a fistful of his shirt and held on like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The ride back to the ranch was the longest 2 miles of Ethan's life. He kept Nora tucked inside his coat against his chest, and Lucy wedged in front of him on the saddle, and he pushed the horse harder than he should have through the storm. Every time Nora's breathing hitched or Lucy's grip loosened, his heart kicked harder. He hadn't prayed in years, not since he buried his wife, but he found himself doing something close to it now, bargaining with a universe that didn't give a damn about bargains. Just let them make it to the house, just that far. When the ranch came into view, lamplight glowing warm through the windows, relief hit him so hard he almost felt sick. He pulled up to the porch, dismounted, carried both girls inside. The house was cold. He'd let the fire burn low before heading out, but it was shelter, and shelter was what they needed. He laid Nora on his bed and Lucy beside her, then got the fire roaring hot and fast, grabbed every blanket he owned and piled them on, heated water, found the bottle of whiskey he kept for emergencies and poured a capful, mixing it with warm water and honey, coaxed Lucy into drinking first, then tried with Nora, but she was too far gone to swallow right. Most of it dribbled down her chin. "Come on," Ethan muttered, tilting her head. "Come on, girl. Don't you quit." Lucy watched him from under the blankets, her eyes tracking his every move. "Is she gonna die?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He pressed his hand to Nora's forehead, still burning, and felt for her pulse. Thin and fast, but there. "Not if I can help it." He worked through this night like a man possessed, kept the fire going, kept trying to get water into Nora, stripped her down and sponged her with cool water when the fever spiked too high, then piled the blankets back on when she started shivering. Lucy drifted in and out of sleep, waking every time Ethan moved too suddenly or Nora made a sound. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, when Ethan was running on nothing but coffee and stubbornness, Lucy spoke up from the bed. "The man with the chain took Mama." Ethan looked up from where he was stoking the fire. "What?" "The man in the black coat. He had a silver chain on his vest with a horse on it. He came to our house and Mama told us to hide, but we heard her screaming." Lucy's voice was flat, like she was reciting something she'd said so many times it didn't hurt anymore. "He took her away. We waited for her to come back, but she didn't. So we left to find help, but we got lost. That's how we ended up in the shack." Ethan set the poker down slow. "When was this?" "I don't know. Days ago. Maybe a week." "What's your mama's name?" "Abigail. Abigail Hart." The name didn't mean anything to Ethan, but the description did. Black coat, silver chain with a horse. There was only one man in 3 counties who dressed like that, and he was the kind of man decent people crossed the street to avoid. Conrad Voss. Ethan felt something old and cold wake up inside him, something he'd buried along with his wife, along with the life he used to live before everything turned to ash. It was rage, but not the hot kind, the patient kind, the kind that waited. "You know him," Lucy said, watching Ethan's face. "I know of him. Is Mama dead?" Ethan looked at this little girl, 4 years old and already asking questions no child should have to ask, and he realized he was at a crossroads. He could lie, could tell her what she wanted to hear, buy himself time, let her hope, or he could tell her the truth and let her start learning how the world really worked. He chose the narrow path between them. "I don't know," Ethan said, "but I'm going to find out." Lucy studied him for a long moment, then nodded, like she'd decided he was telling the truth, like she'd decided to trust him. It was a small thing, that nod, but it hit Ethan harder than he expected. He went back to tending Nora, but his mind was already working through the shape of what came next. Conrad Voss wasn't just some drifter or outlaw you could run off with a shotgun. He was a land baron, the kind of man who owned half the county and had the sheriff in his pocket. If Voss had taken Abigail Hart, it was because she had something he wanted or because she'd gotten in his way. Either way, women who crossed Conrad Voss had a habit of disappearing. And if Voss knew these twins existed, he'd come for them too. Ethan looked down at Nora, her small face slack with fever, and then at Lucy, her dark eyes watching him with that too old expression. Two little girls who should have been tucked safe in a warm house somewhere, not fighting for their lives in a broken-down shack in the middle of nowhere. He'd failed to protect people before. Failed his wife. Failed their unborn child. He'd spent the last 6 years living like a ghost because living like a man hurt too much. But these girls were here now, in his house, under his roof. And if Conrad Voss wanted them, he'd have to go through Ethan first. Dawn broke gray and cold, and Nora's fever finally started to break with it. Her breathing evened out. Her skin cooled. When her eyes fluttered open around 7 in the morning, Lucy let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around her sister. "You're okay," Lucy whispered. "You're okay." Nora blinked slowly, confused, then looked past Lucy to Ethan. "Who's that?" "That's Ethan," Lucy said. "He's saved us." Nora studied him with those big dark eyes, and Ethan felt the weight of it, being looked at like he was someone who mattered, someone who did the right thing. It had been so long since anyone looked at him like that. He'd forgotten what it felt like. "Thank you," Nora whispered. Ethan cleared his throat. "You're welcome. Now you need to rest." But Nora was already asleep again, and Lucy wasn't far behind. Ethan watched them for a while, these two small lives he'd pulled back from the edge, and felt something shift inside him. Not healing exactly. He wasn't fool enough to think 2 starving kids could fix what was broken in him. But a crack, maybe. A hairline fracture in the wall he'd built around himself. He stood, bones aching from a night without sleep, and walked to the window. Outside, the storm had blown itself out, leaving everything covered in fresh snow. Beautiful and deadly, same as always. Somewhere out there, Conrad Voss was going about his business, probably thinking those 2 little girls had frozen to death in that shack, and the problem had solved itself. He was wrong. Ethan turned from the window and looked at the twins sleeping in his bed, small and fragile and alive. Then he looked at the gun belt hanging by the door, the one he hadn't worn in years. He had work to do. By the time the girls woke again, it was past noon and Ethan had food ready. Nothing fancy, just bacon, eggs, and bread, but it might as well have been a feast for how Lucy and Nora tore into it. They ate like they hadn't seen food in days, which they probably hadn't. "Slow down," Ethan said. "You'll make yourselves sick." Lucy paused mid-bite, looked at him, then kept eating. Nora at least tried to slow down, though her eyes never left the plate. When they finished, Ethan poured them both water and sat down across the table. "I need you to tell me everything you remember about the man who took your mama. Everything he said, everything he did. Can you do that?" Lucy nodded. Nora looked scared, but she nodded too. "He came at night," Lucy started. "Mama was putting us to bed, and we heard horses outside. She told us to hide in the closet and be quiet, so we did. We heard the door open and voices, Mama's voice and a man's voice. The man said she owed him money. Mama said she didn't have it yet," Nora added, her voice small. "She said she needed more time." "And what did he say?" Lucy's jaw tightened. "He said time was something she'd run out of. Then there was a lot of yelling and things breaking. Mama screamed at us to stay hidden. We heard her fighting with him. Then it got quiet." "We waited a long time," Nora said. "Lucy said we had to wait until we were sure he was gone. But when we came out, Mama wasn't there. The house was all torn up. There was blood on the floor." Ethan's hands curled into fists under the table. "Did you see which way they went?" "No, it was too dark. We stayed in the house that night, but the next day men came back. Different men. They were looking for something. We ran out the back and hid in the woods." Lucy's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "We walked for a long time. We thought maybe we could find the town, find help, but we got lost. It was so cold. We found the shack and went inside. We thought maybe someone lived there, but it was empty. We tried to keep warm, but Nora got sick." "I'm sorry I got sick," Nora whispered. "Hey," Ethan said, and his voice came out softer than he meant. "You didn't do anything wrong. Either of you. You survived. That's what matters." Lucy looked at him with those 2 old eyes. "Are you going to try to find our mama?" "Yes." "What if she's already dead?" Ethan met her gaze and didn't flinch. "Then I'll make sure the man who killed her pays for it." It was the wrong thing to say to a child. He knew that even as the words left his mouth, but Lucy just nodded like he'd given the right answer. like vengeance was something she understood, even at 4 years old. Maybe especially at 4 years old. Ethan spent the next 2 days getting the girls strong enough to be left alone for a few hours. He fed them regular, kept the house warm, and let them sleep as much as they needed. Nora's fever stayed gone, and the color came back to both their faces. They were still too thin, still too quiet, but they were alive. That was something. On the third day, Ethan rode into town. The settlement wasn't much: a general store, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and a sheriff's office that was more for show than anything else. Ethan tied his horse outside the general store and went inside. The owner, a gray-haired man named Pete Morrison, looked up from behind the counter. Ethan Mercer. Been a while. Pete. What brings you to town? Don't usually see you outside of supply runs. Need some information, Ethan said. You know a woman named Abigail Hart? Pete's expression shifted, guarded now. Might. Why? She's missing. Man named Conrad Voss might have taken her. Pete went still. Then he glanced toward the window, like he was checking to see if anyone was listening. You shouldn't be asking about Voss. I'm asking anyway. Pete sighed and leaned against the counter. Look, I don't know anything for sure, but there's been talk. Women going missing over the past year or so. Some folks say they just moved on, got tired of frontier life, but others say Voss has something to do with it. What's his angle? Debt, mostly. He loans money to folks who can't pay it back, then takes whatever they got. Land, livestock, whatever. Women who can't pay... Pete trailed off, uncomfortable. Well, use your imagination. Ethan's jaw tightened. Sheriff know about this? Sheriff works for Voss, same as half the men in this county. And the other half? Too scared to do anything about it. Ethan stood there a moment, letting that sink in. Then he nodded. Appreciate the honesty. Ethan, Pete's voice stopped him at the door. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. Voss is connected. He's got men, guns, money. You go after him, you'll end up in a hole somewhere. Maybe, Ethan said, but I'll take him with me. He left before Pete could argue further and crossed the street to the saloon. It was early afternoon, so the place was mostly empty, except for a few regulars nursing drinks. Ethan ordered a whiskey and stood at the bar, listening. It didn't take long. Men loved to talk when they'd been drinking, and Voss's name came up more than once. Ethan pieced together a picture. Voss operated out of a big house 10 miles south of town, surrounded by hired guns who made sure nobody got close without an invitation. He owned most of the good land in the county and was always looking to expand. Anyone who got in his way either sold out cheap or disappeared. Abigail Hart's name came up too, though the men didn't know much. Just that she'd been living on a small piece of land with her 2 daughters, trying to make a go of it after her husband died. She'd borrowed money from Voss to keep the place running, and when she couldn't pay it back, he'd come collecting. Shame about those little girls, one man said. Probably froze to death by now. Ethan set his glass down harder than he meant, and the sound cracked through the room. The men looked over, suddenly wary. Those girls are fine, Ethan said. The room went quiet. You found them? One of the men asked. I did. Where are they now? Somewhere safe, and that's where they're staying. The men exchanged looks, and Ethan could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. If Ethan had the girls and Voss wanted them, that made Ethan a problem, and nobody wanted to be standing next to a problem when Voss decided to solve it. They went back to their drinks and stopped talking. Ethan finished his whiskey and left. He rode back to the ranch slow, thinking through what he'd learned. Voss was powerful, connected, and ruthless. The law wouldn't help. The town wouldn't help. If Ethan went after him, he'd be going alone. He'd been alone before. He could do it again. When he got back to the ranch, the girls were awake and playing with a set of old wooden blocks Ethan had found in the back of a closet. They looked up when he came in, and Lucy asked, "Did you find out anything about Mama?" Ethan hung his coat and hat by the door. "I found out where the man who took her lives." "Are you going to go get her?" "Not yet. First I need to make sure you two are safe." "We're safe here," Nora said. Ethan looked at her, this little girl who'd nearly died 3 days ago, and felt the weight of what he was about to say. "Not for long. The man who took your mama, Conrad Voss, He's going to figure out you're alive. And when he does, he'll come for you. Lucy's face went hard. Let him come. Lucy, I'm not scared of him. You should be, Ethan said. He's dangerous. So are you. Ethan blinked. What makes you say that? Lucy tilted her head, studying him. You got that look, like you've hurt people before. Like you'd do it again if you had to. She wasn't wrong. Ethan had been a lawman once, back before the grief swallowed him whole. He'd worn a badge and carried a gun and done things he wasn't proud of in the name of justice. He'd killed men. Not many, but enough. Enough to know what it felt like. Enough to know he could do it again. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. I would. Lucy nodded, satisfied. Then we'll be okay. Ethan wished he had her confidence. That night, after the girls went to sleep, Ethan sat by the fire and cleaned his guns. It had been years since he'd done this, really done it, with intent. But the motions came back easy. Muscle memory. He checked the revolver first, then the rifle, then the shotgun he kept above the door. Loaded them all, set them within reach. Then he walked the perimeter of the ranch, checking sight lines, looking for weaknesses. The house was defensible, but barely. 1 door, 3 windows, all of them easy to shoot through. If Voss came with enough men, Ethan wouldn't be able to hold them off. But maybe he wouldn't have to. Maybe he just had to make it costly enough that Voss would think twice. He was still outside when he heard the sound of a horse approaching. Ethan's hand went to his gun, and he stepped into the shadows by the barn. A rider came into view. Just one, moving slow. Not an attack. A messenger, maybe. The man pulled up near the house and called out, Ethan Mercer? Ethan stepped out where he could be seen, gun drawn. Who's asking? The man held up his hands. Easy. I'm not here for trouble. Got a message from Mr. Voss. I'm listening. The man reached into his coat, slow, careful, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, tossed it toward Ethan. It landed in the dirt between them. Mr. Voss wants his property back, the man said. The 2 girls. You hand them over, there's no trouble. You don't, well, you can guess how that goes. Ethan picked up the paper and unfolded it without taking his eyes off the man. It was a deed, Abigail Hart's land signed over to Conrad Voss. Legal and binding, or close enough. Those girls aren't property, Ethan said. Mr. Voss says otherwise. Their mama owed him money, couldn't pay. So he took the land and the kids as collateral. That's how it works. Not anymore. The man sighed like Ethan was being unreasonable. Look, I'm just delivering the message. You got until tomorrow night to bring them to Voss's place. After that, he's coming here. And when he does, it won't be pretty. Tell Voss if he wants those girls, he can come try to take them. But he better bring enough men, because I'm not giving them up without a fight. The man shook his head. You're making a mistake. Won't be my first. The rider turned his horse and left, and Ethan watched him disappear into the darkness. Then he looked down at the deed in his hand and felt that cold rage burn a little hotter. Tomorrow night. That's how long he had. He went back inside and barred the door. Lucy was awake, standing in the doorway to the bedroom. I heard, she said. You should be asleep. Are they coming for us? Ethan crouched down so he was eye level with her. Yeah, but I'm not going to let them take you. Promise? He should have told her he couldn't promise that. Should have told her the truth. That sometimes bad men win. That sometimes there's nothing you can do. That the world doesn't care about promises. But when he looked at her face, small and scared and trying so hard to be brave, he couldn't do it. I promise, Ethan said. Lucy nodded and went back to bed. Ethan stayed by the door, gun in his lap, and watched the night. He didn't sleep. Dawn came slow and gray, the kind of morning that felt like the world hadn't quite woken up yet. Ethan was already awake, had been all night, sitting in the chair by the window with his rifle across his lap. Every sound outside made his hand twitch toward the trigger. The wind rattling the shutters, a coyote yipping in the distance, his horse shifting in the barn. But no riders came. Not yet. Lucy found him there when she padded out of the bedroom, her sister still asleep behind her. She didn't say anything, just climbed into the chair next to him and tucked herself against his side. Ethan stiffened at first. He wasn't used to being touched, wasn't used to someone trusting him enough to get that close. But then he relaxed. Let her stay. You didn't sleep, Lucy said. Neither did you. I slept a little. Nora was having bad dreams. Ethan glanced toward the bedroom. She okay? She gets them sometimes. Dreams about Mama screaming. I tell her it's not real, but I don't think she believes me. That's because part of it is real, Ethan said. Your mama did scream. Somebody did hurt her. Pretending it didn't happen won't make the dreams stop. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Do you have bad dreams? Yeah. About what? Ethan's jaw tightened. He could have deflected, could have told her it wasn't something she needed to worry about, but she'd asked him straight, and she deserved a straight answer. About my wife, he said. She died 6 years ago. Her and our baby. I dream about the day it happened, about how I wasn't there. Where were you? Town, chasing down a man who'd robbed the bank. I was a lawman back then. I thought catching him mattered more than getting home. Ethan's voice went flat. By the time I got back, she was already gone. Fever took her fast. She died calling for me, and I wasn't there. Lucy looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes. That's why you don't wear the badge anymore. That's why. You think if you'd been there, you could have saved her? I know I could have tried. Lucy nodded like that made sense to her. That's why you're going to save our mama, because you couldn't save yours. Ethan didn't answer. Couldn't. Because she'd just put into words something he hadn't wanted to admit even to himself. Nora woke up an hour later and Ethan made breakfast. Oatmeal with a bit of honey, the last of the bacon, coffee for himself. The girls ate quiet, watching him move around the kitchen like they were trying to memorize him. It made Ethan uncomfortable, that kind of attention. Made him feel like he was supposed to be something he wasn't. After they ate, Ethan started making preparations. He pulled the furniture away from the windows, stacked it to create cover, checked the ammunition again, filled buckets with water in case something caught fire. The girls watched from the corner, Nora clutching a raggedy cloth doll she'd found somewhere in the house. Are they really coming today? Nora asked. Maybe. Maybe tomorrow. I don't know. Ethan dragged a heavy wooden trunk in front of the door. But when they do, I need you both to do exactly what I say. No arguing, no hesitating. Understand? Both girls nodded. If shooting starts, you get down on the floor and you stay down. You don't look, you don't move, you don't make a sound. If I tell you to run, you run. You don't look back, you don't wait for me. You just go. Where would we go? Lucy asked. Ethan pointed out the back window. See that tree line? About half a mile out, there's a creek. You follow it north for 2 miles. You'll hit the old Chapman place. It's abandoned, but the barn's still standing. You hide there until it's safe. How will we know when it's safe? I'll come get you. What if you don't come? Ethan met her eyes. Then you keep going north until you hit the next town. You tell them what happened. You tell them Conrad Voss killed a man named Ethan Mercer. You make sure somebody writes it down. Lucy's face went hard. You're not going to die. Probably not. But if I do, I need to know you'll be okay. We won't be okay. We'll be alone. You'll be alive. That's what matters. Nora started crying, quiet tears running down her cheeks. Lucy put an arm around her sister but kept her eyes on Ethan. You promised you wouldn't let them take us. And I won't. But promises don't stop bullets, Lucy. I'm good, but I'm not that good. If Voss comes with enough men, I might not be able to hold them all off, so I need you ready to run. Can you do that? Lucy hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, we can do that. Good girl. The day dragged on like a held breath. Ethan kept watch, kept listening. The girls stayed quiet, playing with the wooden blocks, or looking at an old book Ethan had on a shelf. He couldn't focus on anything except the waiting. Every minute that passed felt like it was pulling tighter, like a rope about to snap. Around midday, Ethan heard horses. His hand went to his gun, but when he looked out the window, he saw it was just one rider again. Same man as last night, coming up slow with his hands visible. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Thought I made myself clear last night, Ethan called out. The man stopped his horse 20 feet away. I'm not here to fight. Mr. Voss sent me with an offer. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Don't need to. The man sighed. He'll pay you $500. You hand over the girls, you take the money, you forget this ever happened. Everybody walks away. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think I can be bought? Everybody can be bought. It's just a matter of price. Then Voss can't afford me. The man's expression shifted, something colder sliding into place. You're making a mistake, Mercer. Voss doesn't make offers twice. This is your last chance to walk away. Tell Voss I said to go to hell. You're going to regret this. Maybe, but I'll regret it alive, which is more than I can say for anyone who tries to take those girls. The man stared at him for a long moment, then turned his horse and rode off. Ethan watched until he was gone, then went back inside. Lucy was standing by the window, her face pale. He's really not going to stop, is he? She said. No, he's not. Why does he want us so bad? We're just kids. Ethan crouched down in front of her. Because your mama took something from him. Not money. Something worse. She said no. She stood up to him. And men like Voss can't let that stand. If people find out a woman got away from him, others might try. So he needs to make an example. Needs to show everybody what happens when you cross him. That's stupid. That's power. And people do stupid things to keep it. Lucy's hands curled into fists. I hate him. I know. Me too. That night, Ethan didn't bother trying to sleep. He sat by the fire with his guns within reach and kept the lamps burning low. The girls slept fitfully, Nora whimpering every time she rolled over, Lucy jerking awake at every creak and groan of the house settling. Around midnight, Ethan heard something outside. Not horses this time. Footsteps. He moved to the window, slow and quiet, and peered out into the darkness. At first he didn't see anything. Then a shadow shifted near the barn, and Ethan's blood went cold. Someone was out there, watching. He grabbed his rifle and eased the front door open, slipping out onto the porch. The night air was freezing, his breath coming out in white clouds. He scanned the darkness, trying to pick out movement, but whoever had been there was gone now. Or hiding. Ethan was about to go back inside when he saw it, a piece of paper nailed to the barn door. He crossed the yard quick, rifle up, checking every angle. When he reached the barn, he tore the paper down and carried it back to the house. Inside, by lamplight, he read the message scrawled in rough handwriting. Tomorrow night, you and the girls, Voss's place. Or we come to you. No signature, didn't need one. Ethan crumpled the paper and threw it into the fire. Tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours. He'd known it was coming, but seeing it written out made it real in a way it hadn't been before. This was happening. No more delays, no more chances. Lucy appeared in the bedroom doorway, rubbing her eyes. What was that? Nothing. Go back to sleep. You're lying. Ethan turned to look at her, this little girl who saw through him like glass. Yeah, I am. What did the paper say? He could have kept lying, but what was the point? She'd find out soon enough. Voss wants us at his place tomorrow night. If we don't go, he's coming here. So what are we going to do? I don't know yet. Lucy walked over and stood next to him, staring into the fire. We could run, leave tonight, go somewhere he can't find us. He'd find us. Men like Voss always do. Then we fight. You're 4 years old, Lucy. You're not fighting anybody. Then what? Ethan looked down at her, saw the fear hiding behind the anger, and felt something break inside him. She shouldn't have to be this brave. Shouldn't have to stand here talking about fighting and running and dying like it was normal. She should be worried about dolls and games and whether there'd be cake for her birthday. But the world didn't care what she should be worried about. The world had handed her this, and now she had to carry it. I'm going to go get your mama, Ethan said. Lucy's eyes went wide. What? If Voss wants to trade, I'll trade, but not you. Me. He'll kill you. Maybe. But maybe I can get your mama out first. And if I do, she can take you somewhere safe. Somewhere Voss will never find you. That's a bad plan. It's the only plan I've got. Lucy grabbed his arm, her small fingers digging in hard. Don't go, please. We need you here. You need your mama more. We need both. Ethan gently pulled his arm free. Sometimes you don't get both. Sometimes you have to choose. He went to the closet and started pulling out supplies, rope, a knife, his gun belt, the heavy coat he saved for the worst weather. Lucy watched him, tears running down her face now, not bothering to hide them. When are you leaving? She whispered. Soon as it's light enough to ride. What if you don't come back? Ethan stopped what he was doing and looked at her, really looked at her. Then you remember what I told you. You take Nora and you run. You don't stop until you're safe. I don't want to run. I want to stay with you. I know, but you can't. He finished packing and set everything by the door. Then he sat down next to Lucy on the floor and let her cry. He wasn't good at this part. The comforting, the soft words, the promises that everything would be okay. His wife had been good at that. She'd known how to make people feel safe. Ethan only knew how to make them feel protected, and that wasn't the same thing. But he tried. Put an awkward arm around Lucy's shoulders and let her lean against him while she cried herself out. Eventually, she fell asleep there on the floor, and Ethan carried her back to bed. Nora was already awake, watching. "Is Lucy okay?" she asked. "She's scared." "Me too." "I know." Nora sat up, her thin arms wrapped around her knees. "Are you really going to try to save our mama?" "Yeah." "What if she's already dead?" It was the second time someone had asked him that, and his answer hadn't changed. "Then the man who killed her is going to wish he was." Nora studied him for a long moment. "You're different from other grown-ups." "How so?" "You don't lie to make us feel better. You just tell the truth." "Truth's all I got." "I like that," Nora said. Then quieter, "Thank you for saving us." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and left the room. He spent the rest of the night checking his weapons, going over the plan in his head. It wasn't much of a plan. Ride to Voss's place, scout it out, find where they were keeping Abigail, get her out. Simple. Probably impossible. But doing nothing wasn't an option, and waiting for Voss to make the first move meant fighting on ground Ethan didn't control. Better to take the fight to him. When dawn finally broke, Ethan saddled his horse and loaded his saddlebags with ammunition, food, and water. The girls were awake, standing on the porch watching him. He told them to stay inside, lock the door, and not open it for anyone but him. He'd shown Lucy how to load the shotgun just in case. She was too small to fire it without falling over, but if she braced it right, she could maybe get one shot off. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ethan swung up into the saddle and looked down at them. Lucy's face was set hard, like she was holding herself together through pure stubbornness. Nora just looked small and scared. "I'll be back by tomorrow morning," Ethan said. "If I'm not back by noon, you do what I told you. You run." "We'll wait," Lucy said. "Lucy, we'll wait." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to make her promise she'd leave, but he could see it wouldn't do any good. She'd made up her mind. So he just nodded and turned his horse toward the trail. He'd ridden maybe 100 yards when he heard Lucy shout behind him. "Ethan!" He pulled up and turned. She was running after him, her too big coat flapping around her. When she reached him, she stopped, breathing hard. "You forgot something," she said. "What?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of cloth, part of the ribbon from Nora's doll. She held it up to him. "So you remember to come back," she said. Ethan took the ribbon and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I'll remember." Lucy nodded, satisfied, and ran back to the house. Ethan watched her go, then turned and rode south toward Conrad Voss's land. The ride took most of the morning. Ethan kept off the main trails, staying to the tree line where he could move without being seen. The land this far south was better than his, richer soil, more water, the kind of ground that could make a man wealthy if he worked it right, or if he stole enough of it from other people. Voss's house came into view around midday. It sat on a low hill, a sprawling two-story structure with white columns and a wide porch that screamed money. Barns and outbuildings dotted the property, and Ethan counted at least a dozen men moving around. Some were working, mending fences, tending horses, but others were just standing around with rifles, clearly guards. Ethan dismounted and tied his horse deep in the trees, then moved closer on foot. He found a good vantage point on a ridge overlooking the property and settled in to watch. He needed to know the layout, the patrol patterns, where they were keeping Abigail, if they were keeping her. He watched for 2 hours before he saw her. She was in one of the outbuildings, a small structure set apart from the others. Ethan caught a glimpse of her through the window, a woman with dark hair, thin and pale, her hands bound in front of her. 2 guards stood outside the door. She was alive. Barely, from the look of her, but alive. Ethan felt the tight knot in his chest loosen slightly. Alive meant he still had a chance. He watched the guards rotate shifts, memorizing the timing. Every 4 hours, 2 new men took over. During the changeover, there was about a 30-second window where the building was unguarded. Not much time, but maybe enough. The sun was starting to set when Ethan made his decision. He'd wait until after dark, when most of the men would be inside eating or sleeping. He'd approach from the east, where the tree line came closest to the outbuilding, cut the guards during the shift change, get Abigail out, be gone before anyone noticed. It was a terrible plan. Too many things could go wrong, but it was the only plan he had. Night fell slow, the sky going from gray to black. Ethan waited, watching the house. Lights came on in the windows. He could hear voices carrying on the wind, laughter from the main house. These men thought they were untouchable, thought nobody would be crazy enough to come here. They were about to find out different. Around 10 o'clock, Ethan saw the guards at the outbuilding start to look restless. Shift change was coming. He moved down from the ridge, staying low, keeping to the shadows. His heart was pounding now, that old familiar feeling from his lawman days, part fear, part anticipation. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be on the edge like this, forgotten how alive it made him feel. He reached the tree line and waited. The new guards approached from the main house, walking slow, talking to each other. The old guard said something Ethan couldn't hear, probably complaining about the cold. They started walking back toward the house. 30 seconds. That's all he had. Ethan moved. He crossed the open ground fast and quiet, reaching the building just as the old guards disappeared around the corner. The door was locked, but it was a cheap lock. Ethan pulled out his knife and worked it into the gap, jimmying it until something gave. The door swung open. Inside, Abigail Hart sat on a wooden chair in the corner, her eyes wide with terror. Her mouth was gagged, her hands tied to the chair arms. She made a muffled sound when she saw him, trying to scream or warn him or something. "Quiet!" Ethan hissed. He crossed to her and cut the gag first, then the ropes. "Your daughters sent me." Abigail's face crumpled. "Lucy? Nora? They're alive?" "They're safe. Now move. We don't have much time." She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. Ethan caught her, half carrying her toward the door. They were almost there when he heard voices outside. The new guards, coming back. They must have seen the open door. "Damn it," Ethan breathed. He pulled Abigail back into the shadows and drew his gun. The door swung open and a guard stepped inside, rifle up. "Hey, who the hell?" Ethan shot him. The sound was deafening in the small space, and the guard dropped like a stone. The second guard appeared in the doorway, and Ethan shot him too, but this one got a shot off first. The bullet went wide, punching through the wall behind Ethan's head. "Run!" Ethan shouted at Abigail. She stumbled out the door and Ethan followed, but already he could hear shouting from the main house. Lights were coming on. Men were grabbing weapons. The whole place was waking up like a kicked anthill. Ethan grabbed Abigail's arm and pulled her toward the tree line. She was weak, could barely run, but fear gave her enough strength to keep moving. They made it maybe 50 yards before the first shot started kicking up dirt around them. Ethan fired back without looking, just trying to keep their heads down, give Abigail time to reach the trees. A bullet caught him in the left shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded hot and bright, but he kept moving. Another few steps. Almost there. They crashed into the tree line, and Ethan dragged Abigail deeper into the woods. Behind them, men were shouting, organizing. They'd be coming soon. Ethan pressed his hand to his shoulder, blood, warm and wet, soaking through his shirt. Not good, but he couldn't stop now. "Can you ride?" he asked Abigail. She nodded, breathing hard. They reached his horse, and Ethan boosted her up, then pulled himself into the saddle behind her. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he gritted his teeth and kicked the horse into motion. They crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping past, and Ethan could hear horses behind them now, Voss's men giving chase. The ride back was a blur of pain and darkness. Ethan's shoulder bled steadily, making him lightheaded. He kept one arm wrapped around Abigail to keep her from falling, the other holding the reins. Every jolt sent fresh agony through him, but he didn't slow down. Couldn't. If they caught him now, it was over. Somewhere around midnight, Ethan heard the pursuit fall back. Either they'd lost the trail in the dark, or they'd decided it wasn't worth chasing him onto open ground where he might have backup waiting. Either way, he wasn't stopping to find out. Dawn was breaking when Ethan finally saw his ranch in the distance. He was barely conscious now, swaying in the saddle, his vision going gray at the edges. Abigail was talking to him, trying to keep him awake, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Almost there," she was saying. "Just a little further. Stay with me." The horse carried them into the yard and stopped. Ethan tried to dismount, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He fell, hitting the ground hard, and the world tilted sideways. He heard the front door bang open, heard Lucy screaming his name, felt small hands grabbing at him. "Mama?" That was Nora's voice, high and disbelieving. "Mama!" "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Ethan tried to say something, tried to tell them he was fine, but the darkness was pulling at him now, and he couldn't fight it anymore. The last thing he saw before everything went black was Lucy's face above him, her eyes wide with terror. "Don't die," she was saying. "Please don't die." Then nothing. Ethan woke to pain. Not the sharp kind that comes from a fresh wound, but the deep grinding ache that meant his body had been working overtime to keep him alive while he was unconscious. His shoulder felt like someone had shoved hot coals under the skin and left them there to burn. When he tried to move, the room spun sideways and his stomach lurched. "Don't." A woman's voice, firm but gentle, a hand pressed against his chest, keeping him down. "You lost a lot of blood. You need to stay still." Ethan's vision cleared enough to make out Abigail Hart sitting beside the bed, a bowl of water and bloody rags on the table next to her. She looked different from the terrified woman he'd pulled out of that building, still pale, still too thin, but there was steel in her eyes now, the kind that came from surviving something you weren't supposed to survive. "How long was I out?" Ethan's voice came out like gravel. 2 days. You had a fever. I thought—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought you weren't going to make it." "Where are the girls?" "Outside. They've been taking turns watching for riders." Abigail wrung out a cloth and pressed it to his forehead. "Lucy barely left your side the whole time. Had to make her eat, make her sleep. That child is stubborn as a mule." "Runs in the family, I'm guessing." A small smile ghosted across Abigail's face, but it didn't last. "I need to thank you for what you did, for saving my daughters, for coming after me. You didn't have to do any of that." "Yeah, I did." "Why? You don't know us. We're nothing to you." Ethan stared at the ceiling, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. "I found them half dead in that shack. Could have left them there. Could have told myself it wasn't my problem. But I didn't. And once you make a choice like that, you don't get to unmake it. Those girls are alive because of me, which means keeping them that way is on me too." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "Lucy said you promised you wouldn't let Voss take them." "I did. You know he's coming. After what you did, killing his men, taking me, he can't let that stand. He'll come with everything he has." "I know. So what's your plan?" Ethan tried to sit up, managed it this time though the room tilted dangerously. "Same plan as before. I fight, you run." "I'm not running anymore." "Then you're a fool. Voss has 20 men, maybe more. I can't fight them all, especially not like this." He gestured at his bandaged shoulder. "Best I can do is hold them off long enough for you three to get away." Abigail's jaw tightened. "Those are my daughters out there. I'm not leaving them again." "Then you'll die with them. Is that what you want?" "Don't you dare!" She caught herself, took a breath. "I've been running for 2 years. Ever since my husband died and Voss started circling like a vulture. I ran from town to town, tried to disappear, tried to make a life somewhere he couldn't find us. But he always found us. Always. And every time I ran, it got worse. So no, I'm not running anymore. If Voss wants my children, he'll have to go through me first." Ethan studied her, seeing something he recognized. The look of someone who'd been pushed past their breaking point and found something harder on the other side. He'd worn that look himself once. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. "My husband taught me. I'm not great, but I can hit what I'm aiming at if it's close enough." "Close enough works." Ethan swung his legs over the side of the bed, fighting down a wave of dizziness. "Then we make our stand here, together. But if things go south, you get those girls out. That's not negotiable." Abigail nodded. "Agreed." The door banged open, and Lucy rushed in, Nora right behind her. Both girls stopped when they saw Ethan sitting up, their faces flooding with relief. "You're awake," Lucy breathed. "Hard to sleep with all the noise you two make," Ethan said, and was rewarded with a tiny smile from Nora. Lucy crossed the room and threw her arms around him, careful of his shoulder. "I thought you were gonna die. You were so pale and you wouldn't wake up and there was so much blood. Hey, I'm all right." Ethan awkwardly patted her back with his good arm. takes more than a bullet to kill me." "Don't joke about that," Lucy said fiercely. "It's not funny." "You're right. I'm sorry." Lucy pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Mama says Voss is coming. Is that true?" "Yeah, probably soon." "Good." The hardness in Lucy's voice would have been disturbing if Ethan didn't understand it so well. "I want to see his face when you kill him." "Lucy!" Abigail's voice was sharp. "Don't talk like that." "Why not? He hurt you. He tried to kill us. He deserves to die." "Maybe he does, but that doesn't mean a child should want to watch it happen." Lucy's jaw set in a way that said this argument wasn't over, but she didn't push it. Instead, she turned back to Ethan. "Can you stand?" "Let's find out." With Abigail's help, Ethan got to his feet. The room swayed but held steady. His shoulders screamed at him, and he knew the wound wasn't fully closed yet, probably would reopen if he moved wrong. But he could stand, could walk, could shoot if he had to. That would have to be enough. Over the next few hours, Ethan and Abigail turned the ranch into a fortress. They moved furniture to create firing positions at each window, stacked flour sacks and grain bags to absorb bullets, loaded every gun in the house and positioned them where they could be reached fast. Ethan showed Abigail how to reload the rifle, made her practice until she could do it blind. Lucy and Nora hauled buckets of water from the well, filling every container they could find. "Why do we need water?" Nora asked. "We gonna get thirsty?" "Fire," Ethan said. "If they can't take us by shooting, they might try to burn us out. Water's our best defense against that." Nora's eyes went wide. "They'd burn the house down? With us inside?" "Men like Voss will do whatever it takes to win. You need to understand that. There's no line they won't cross." "That's evil." "Yeah, it is." By late afternoon, Ethan's strength was flagging. The work had reopened his shoulder wound and blood was seeping through the bandage. Abigail made him sit down and re-bandaged it, her hands quick and efficient. "You should be in bed," she said. "I've been in bed 2 days. That's long enough." "You're going to hurt yourself worse." "I'm already hurt. Might as well make it count." Abigail tied off the bandage harder than necessary. "You're as stubborn as your wife probably was." Ethan went still. "What did you say?" She met his eyes, and there was something sad in her expression. "Lucy told me about her, about how you lost her. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." "Grief doesn't care how long it's been." Ethan didn't have an answer for that, so he just nodded and went back to checking the ammunition count. They had maybe 200 rounds total, spread across 3 rifles, 2 shotguns, and his revolver. Not nearly enough if Voss came with his full force, but more than Ethan had survived on before. The sun was setting when Nora called out from the window. "Riders coming!" Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved to look. Sure enough, 3 horses were approaching from the south, moving slow and deliberate. Not an attack, a parley. "Get away from the windows," Ethan told the girls. To Abigail, "Stay ready. This could be a distraction." The riders stopped about 50 yards out, just within shouting distance. Ethan recognized one of them, the same messenger who'd been coming and going with Voss's offers. The other 2 were hired guns, the kind of men who killed for money and didn't lose sleep over it. "Ethan Mercer," the messenger called out. "Mr. Voss wants to talk." "Tell Voss to come say it himself," Ethan shouted back. "He's willing to make one final offer. Not interested. You haven't heard it yet. Don't need to." The messenger turned and said something to the other riders. One of them shrugged. They conferred for a moment, then the messenger tried again. "Mr. Voss says you can keep the woman. Just give us the children, and this ends peaceful." Ethan felt Abigail stiffen beside him. He raised his voice. "The answer is no. Now get off my land before I shoot you for trespassing." "Be reasonable, Mercer. You can't win this. We've got 30 men ready to ride. You give up the girls now, everybody walks away alive. Except the girls. They're his property. He's got a legal claim. There's nothing legal about kidnapping children." Ethan aimed his rifle at the messenger. "This is your last warning. Leave. Now." The messenger stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You just signed your own death warrant." The 3 riders turned and galloped away. Ethan watched them go, his fingers still on the trigger, waiting for the ambush he was sure was coming. But they just rode off into the gathering dark. "What now?" Abigail asked. "Now they'll wait for full dark, then come at us hard. They wanted to see our setup, see if we'd scare. We didn't, so they'll stop playing nice. How long do we have? Ethan glanced at the sky. Couple hours. Maybe less. Lucy had been listening from her spot on the floor. What if we left right now, before they come back? They've got the place surrounded by now. We'd ride straight into them. So we're trapped. We're dug in. There's a difference. Night fell fast, the way it always did out here. 1 minute there was light, the next there was just darkness and stars. Ethan kept the lamps burning low, enough to see by but not enough to make them easy targets. The girls huddled together on the floor between the bed and the wall, the safest spot in the house. Abigail took position at the north window, Ethan at the south, waiting. The attack came around 10 o'clock. No warning, no announcement, just the sudden thunder of hoofbeats and the crack of gunfire. Bullets punched through the walls, shattered the windows, sent splinters flying. Ethan dropped to one knee and returned fire, picking his shots careful. He saw a man fall from his horse, saw another grab his arm and peel off. But there were too many of them, coming from too many directions. North side, Abigail shouted, firing her rifle. 3 more coming in. Ethan scrambled to her window and saw riders charging the house. He aimed for the horses, hated doing it, but they were bigger targets, and it put the riders on foot. One horse went down screaming, and its rider tumbled hard into the dirt. The other 2 veered off, circling back. Reload, Ethan barked. Abigail's hands shook, but she got it done. More gunfire raked the house, and one of the water buckets exploded, spilling across the floor. Nora screamed. Lucy clapped a hand over her sister's mouth, keeping her quiet. The first wave broke off, regrouping in the darkness. Ethan used the lull to check their ammunition. They'd burned through maybe 30 rounds in under 2 minutes. At this rate, they'd be empty inside an hour. How many did we get? Abigail asked, her voice tight. 3 down, couple wounded, but they're just testing us. Next wave will be worse. She looked at him, fear showing through now. We can't hold them all night. Don't have to. Just have to make them think twice about whether we're worth the cost. The second wave hit harder. This time they came on foot, using the darkness as cover, trying to get close enough to rush the house. Ethan saw movement near the barn and fired. A man yelped and stumbled back. Another shape darted toward the west wall and Abigail's rifle barked, but she missed. The man made it to the wall, and Ethan heard something scrape against the wood. They're trying to set a fire, he shouted. He ran to the west window and looked down. Sure enough, a man was piling brush against the wall, a torch in his hand. Ethan aimed through the broken glass and fired. The man dropped the torch and fell backwards, clutching his leg. The brush caught anyway, small flames licking up the outside wall. Water! Ethan yelled. Lucy grabbed a bucket and threw it at the wall. Most of it hit, dampening the flames, but not enough. The fire kept spreading. Nora grabbed another bucket and Lucy helped her lift it. Together they doused the wall again and the fire sputtered out, leaving black scorch marks. More gunfire erupted from the south side and Ethan ran back to his position. 2 men were trying to force the door. He fired through it, the heavy wood doing little to slow the bullets. 1 man fell. The other ran. They're going to circle back, Abigail warned. We can't watch every direction at once. She was right. Ethan's vision was starting to blur from blood loss and exhaustion. His shoulder felt like it was on fire. Every time he raised the rifle, pain shot down his arm. He was slowing down, missing shots he should have made. The third wave came from all sides at once. A coordinated push meant to overwhelm them. Ethan and Abigail fired as fast as they could reload, but men were getting closer. Someone made it onto the porch. Ethan heard boots on the wood and swung his rifle toward the door just as it burst open. The man who came through had a shotgun raised. Ethan's rifle was empty. Time slowed down, that strange stretched-out moment before violence where you see everything crystal clear. The man's finger tightening on the trigger, Abigail screaming something, Lucy moving. Then the shotgun Ethan had given Lucy, the one he'd shown her how to brace, went off with a deafening roar. The man flew backwards like he'd been kicked by a horse and landed in a heap on the porch. Lucy stood there, the shotgun smoking in her hands, her face white with shock. Good shot, Ethan said, and meant it. Lucy dropped the gun and started shaking. Nora crawled over to her and they held on to each other while the battle raged around them. Ethan grabbed his revolver and ran to the door. The man Lucy had shot was dead, half his chest gone. Ethan stepped over him and fired at the shapes moving in the darkness. Another man went down. Then another. but they kept coming. Something hit the roof. Footsteps overhead. Someone was trying to get in from above. "Watch the ceiling," Ethan shouted. A section of the roof splintered and cracked. A man started dropping through. Abigail fired upward and the man screamed, falling the rest of the way and crashing onto the floor. He didn't get up. Ethan was reloading when he heard the voice outside. Loud, commanding, different from the chaos. "Cease fire!" The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. Ethan moved to the window, gun ready. A figure on horseback sat just beyond the firelight, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black coat. Even from here, Ethan could see the silver chain glinting on his vest. Conrad Voss had finally come himself. "Mercer!" Voss's voice carried easy across the yard. "You've made your point. You can fight. But this is over. You're out of time and almost out of bullets. Send out the children and we'll leave. You and the woman can live." "Go to hell," Ethan shouted back. "I'm offering you a way out. Take it. I'd rather die than give you those girls. That can be arranged." Voss's horse shifted, and in the lamplight Ethan saw his face clearly for the first time. Hard, cruel, the face of a man who'd never heard the word no and meant it. But why should it come to that? This isn't your fight. These aren't your children. Why die for them? Ethan looked back at Lucy and Nora still clinging to each other on the floor. Looked at Abigail, bloody and exhausted but still standing. Looked at the bullet holes in his walls, the bodies on his porch, the life he'd spent 6 years building that was being torn apart tonight. "Because somebody has to," he called back. Voss laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Noble. Stupid, but noble. I respect that. So I'll make you one final offer. You come out here, face me yourself. You win, we leave. I win, I take the children. Either way, this ends tonight." Abigail grabbed Ethan's arm. "Don't. It's a trap." "Probably. Then why are you considering it?" "Because he's right. We can't hold out much longer, and if this is a chance to end it without the girls getting hurt, I have to take it. He'll kill you. Maybe, or maybe I'll kill him." Ethan checked his revolver. 5 rounds left. Not many, but enough. "If I don't come back, you know what to do." "Ethan, promise me, you'll get them out." Abigail's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I promise." Ethan looked at Lucy. "Remember what I taught you about running?" "I remember." Her voice was small, scared. "But you're coming back, right?" Ethan wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything would be fine. But she'd asked for the truth, so that's what he gave her. "I'm going to try." He walked to the door and stepped out onto the porch. The night air hit him cold, and he could smell smoke and blood and gunpowder. Bodies lay scattered across the yard. His work mostly, though Abigail had gotten her share. He'd made Voss pay for every inch. Now it was time to see if the bill was high enough. Voss dismounted and walked forward, stopping about 20 feet away. Up close, he was bigger than Ethan expected, taller and heavier, with the kind of muscle that came from working land when you were young and keeping power when you got old. The silver chain caught the lamplight, and Ethan saw it clear now. A horse rearing, beautifully detailed. Probably cost more than most men made in a year. "You're either the bravest man I've met or the dumbest," Voss said. "I've been called both." "Former lawman, aren't you? I heard about you. Ethan Mercer, the marshal who quit after his wife died. Spent the last 6 years hiding out here feeling sorry for himself. You've done your homework. I make it a point to know who I'm dealing with." Voss gestured at the ranch. "Nice place. Quiet. Good land. You could have lived here another 40 years if you'd minded your own business." "I did mind my business. You made it my business when you tried to take those girls." "Those girls are mine by right. Their mother owed me money. Couldn't pay. So I collected." "You collected a woman and 2 children like they were livestock." "I collected what was owed." Voss's voice hardened. "That's how this world works, Mercer. You take what's yours and you hold it. Those who can't understand that get left behind. Or they stand up and fight. And they die. Usually badly." Voss pulled his coat back, revealing the gun on his hip. "Is that what you want? To die badly?" Ethan's hand hovered near his own gun. "I want you to leave those girls alone. I want you to ride away and never come back. I want you to pay for every woman you've hurt, every life you've destroyed. But I'll settle for killing you here in my yard." Voss smiled, and it was the coldest thing Ethan had ever seen. Then draw. Everything happened fast. Ethan's hand went for his gun. Voss went for his. For one frozen heartbeat, they were both moving, both pulling iron, both knowing only one of them would walk away from this. Ethan was faster. His gun cleared leather first, came up smooth, finger already on the trigger. But before he could fire, something small and fast darted between him and Voss. Lucy. She'd run out from the house, positioning herself directly in the line of fire. Ethan's finger froze on the trigger. Behind Lucy, Voss completed his draw and aimed his gun right at her. "Lucy, move!" Ethan screamed. She didn't move, just stood there tiny and defiant, staring up at Conrad Voss. Voss's face twisted with rage. "Foolish little brat!" He grabbed Lucy by the arm, hauling her in front of him like a shield, pulled a knife from his belt and pressed it against her throat. "Drop the gun, Mercer, or I cut her ear to ear." Ethan's world narrowed to that knife, that blade touching Lucy's skin. His gun felt heavy as a stone. "Don't do it," Lucy said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Don't let him win." "Shut up," Voss snarled, pressing the knife harder. A thin line of blood appeared on Lucy's throat. Ethan's hand tightened on his gun. Every instinct screamed at him to drop it, to surrender, to save this child who'd trusted him. But he knew Voss, knew men like him. Even if Ethan surrendered, Voss would kill them all anyway. There was no mercy in him, no honor, just cruelty dressed up as business. The entire ranch went silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Abigail stood frozen in the doorway, rifle half raised but useless. Voss's men watched from the darkness, waiting to see how this would end. Lucy looked at Ethan, really looked at him. And in her eyes he saw something that broke his heart and put it back together at the same time. Trust. She trusted him. Even now, with the knife at her throat and death seconds away, she believed he would save her. She'd given him that small piece of ribbon to remember to come back, and here he was, and she trusted him to do what needed doing. Ethan took a breath, steadied his hand, aimed, not at Voss's center mass where Lucy was in the way, not at his shoulder or arm where a miss meant Lucy died. At his head. At the small visible portion above Lucy's hair, a shot that was almost impossible in good light with a rested hand, let alone now. Time stretched. Ethan could feel his heartbeat slow and steady, could feel the weight of the gun, familiar as his own skin, could feel every wound, every ache, every drop of blood he'd lost, could feel 6 years of grief and guilt and rage, all focused down to this single moment. Lucy closed her eyes. Ethan fired. The bullet took Voss in the forehead, right between the eyes. His head snapped back and the knife fell from his hand. Lucy stumbled forward as his grip went slack, and Voss collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, dead before he hit the ground. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Lucy started crying and ran to Ethan, and he caught her with his good arm, holding her tight while she sobbed into his chest. Voss's men stood there, weapons ready, staring at their dead boss. Ethan raised his gun again, ready for them to come at him all at once, ready to go down fighting. But they didn't move. The messenger who'd been coming and going stepped forward, hands visible and empty. "We're done here," he said. "Voss is dead. We got no quarrel with you now." "Take your dead and get off my land," Ethan said. The men moved slow, gathering bodies, retrieving horses. Within 10 minutes they were gone, riding south into the darkness. Ethan watched them go, his gun still in his hand, not quite believing it was over. Abigail appeared beside him, Nora in her arms. She looked at Voss's body, then at Ethan, then at the child still clinging to him. "You saved her," she whispered. "She saved herself. I just pulled the trigger." Lucy pulled back enough to look up at him. "I knew you'd do it. I knew you wouldn't miss. What if I had?" "You didn't." Such simple faith, such absolute certainty. Ethan had no idea what he'd done to earn it, but looking down at this little girl who'd survived so much and was still standing, he decided maybe he didn't need to understand it. Maybe it was enough that it existed. The sun came up a few hours later, painting the ranch in shades of gold and red. Ethan sat on the porch steps, his shoulder freshly bandaged, watching the light spread across land that was quiet again. Bodies had been cleared away. Bullet holes would need patching. The scorch marks on the wall would need scraping and paint. But the ranch was still standing. The people inside it were still alive. That was more than he'd hoped for. Abigail came out and sat beside him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She gave him one, and they sat in silence for a while, just drinking and watching the sunrise. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "I don't know. Sheriff's gonna want answers when he finds out Voss is dead." Voss owned the sheriff. Owned, past tense. Man's dead now, which means whatever hold he had dies with him. Ethan took a sip of coffee. "I'll ride into town later, tell them what happened. They'll either believe me or they won't, but I'm not running from this." "What about us? The girls and me?" Ethan looked at her. "What about you?" "I've got nowhere to go. No house, no money, no way to take care of my daughters. I was thinking, if you'd let us, we could stay here. For a while. Until I figure something out." "How long's a while?" "I don't know. A few weeks, a month." Ethan thought about it. Thought about going back to the way things were before. The quiet house, the empty rooms, the days bleeding into each other with nothing to mark them. Thought about Lucy's laugh, Nora's questions, Abigail's steady presence. Thought about what it felt like to have people depending on him again. "Stay as long as you need," he said. Abigail's eyes went bright. "Thank you. We'll earn our keep. I can cook, clean, help with the ranch work. The girls can... Just stay. That's enough." She smiled and reached over, squeezing his hand once before letting go. They sat there until the coffee was gone and the sun was fully up, and for the first time in 6 years, Ethan didn't mind the company. 3 days after the gunfight, Ethan rode into town with Abigail beside him and the twins in the back of the wagon. His shoulder still ached like hell, but he could move it now without wanting to scream. The bandages were fresh, the bleeding had stopped, and he'd managed to sleep a full night without fever dreams of Voss's men storming the ranch. Progress, he supposed, even if it felt fragile. The town looked the same as always, dusty Main Street, a few horses tied up outside the saloon, Pete Morrison sweeping the porch of his general store. But there was a tension in the air Ethan could feel the moment they rolled in. People stopped what they were doing to stare. A woman hustled her children inside. 2 men standing outside the blacksmith shop went quiet and watched them pass. News had traveled. It always did. Ethan pulled the wagon up outside the sheriff's office and climbed down, helping Abigail after him. The girls stayed in the wagon like he'd told them, though Lucy's hand had drifted toward the small knife Ethan had given her for protection. Smart kid. The sheriff's office was a cramped single room that smelled like old coffee and older tobacco. Sheriff Dawes sat behind his desk, a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. He looked up when Ethan walked in, and his expression didn't change. Just looked. Waited. "Sheriff," Ethan said. "Mercer." Dawes leaned back in his chair. "Heard you had some trouble out at your place." "You could call it that. Heard Conrad Voss is dead. Heard you killed him." "I did." "Heard you killed 5 of his men, too. Maybe more. They came onto my land, tried to take 2 children by force. I defended my home." Dawes picked up a pencil and tapped it against the desk. "That's one version of events. It's the only version that matters. It's what happened. Voss's men tell it different. Say you kidnapped Abigail Hart, murdered their boss in cold blood, killed anyone who tried to stop you." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Voss's men are liars, same as their boss was. "Maybe. Or maybe you're the liar." Dawes set the pencil down. "Thing is, Mercer, I got a problem. Conrad Voss was an important man in this county. Owned a lot of land, employed a lot of people, contributed to a lot of causes. His death leaves a hole that's going to be hard to fill. So you're here to arrest me for filling it. I'm here to figure out what happened. Because right now, all I got is your word against his men's word. And I'm not sure which one I believe." Before Ethan could respond, the door opened behind him. Abigail walked in, her back straight, her chin up. She looked at Dawes like she was looking at something unpleasant she'd scraped off her boot. "You want the truth, Sheriff? I'll give it to you. Conrad Voss kidnapped me 2 weeks ago, held me prisoner in a building on his property, beat me, threatened my children. When Mr. Mercer came to rescue me, Voss's men tried to kill him. They failed. Then Voss came to Ethan's ranch with 30 armed men and demanded we hand over my daughters. When we refused, he attacked. Ethan defended us. Voss pulled a knife on my 4-year-old daughter, and Ethan shot him dead." That's what happened. That's the truth. And if you don't believe me, you can go ask my girls. They saw the whole thing. Akikis. Maches. Dawes stared at her. You expect me to believe Conrad Voss kidnapped you? I don't care what you believe. I'm telling you what happened. And why would Voss kidnap you? What possible reason? Because I owed him money and he thought he could take whatever he wanted to settle the debt, including me, including my children. Abigail's voice shook but held steady. You know what kind of man he was, Sheriff. Everyone in this town knows. You just chose not to see it because he had money and power, and you were too much of a coward to stand up to him. Dawes's face flushed red. You watch your mouth, Mrs. Hart. I'm the law in this town. You're Voss's puppet, or you were, until Ethan cut the strings. The sheriff stood up, his chair scraping loud against the floor. I could arrest you both right now, lock you up until the judge comes through next month. Let him sort this out. You could, Ethan said quietly. But you won't. Why's that? Because if you arrest us, you'll have to explain to that judge why you never investigated any of the other women who went missing, why you never questioned Voss about his business practices, why you looked the other way while he built his little empire on extortion and fear. Ethan stepped closer to the desk. And once people start asking those questions, they're going to wonder how much Voss was paying you to keep quiet. Dawes went very still. You got no proof of that. Don't need proof. Just need suspicion. And once folks start suspecting, they don't stop. Ethan held the sheriff's gaze. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to write up a report that says Conrad Voss attacked my ranch. I killed him in self-defense, and the matter is closed. You're going to file it and forget about it. And in return, I won't go digging into your financial records or asking questions about where all your money came from. The silence stretched out long and heavy. Finally, Dawes sat back down. Get out of my office, he said. Is that a yes? It's a get out before I change my mind. Ethan turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. There are women still missing. One's Voss took. I want them found and brought home. That's not your concern. It is now. You've got 1 week to start looking. If you don't, I'll go to the territorial marshal myself. Tell them everything I know about Voss's operation and everyone who helped him run it. Dawes's eyes went cold. You're making an enemy, Mercer. Already got plenty of those. One more won't make much difference. Outside, the sun was high and hot. Ethan helped Abigail back into the wagon and climbed up beside her. The girls were right where he'd left them, Lucy still gripping that knife. He snapped the reins and they started moving, and it wasn't until they were clear of town that Abigail spoke. Do you think he'll actually look for the women? No, but I'll make sure someone does. How? I know a federal marshal, served with him years ago. If I send him a letter about what's been happening here, he'll come. And once he starts digging, Dawes won't be able to stop him. Abigail was quiet for a moment. You didn't have to do that. Stand up to the sheriff like that. You could have just walked away. Could have. Didn't want to. Why not? Ethan glanced back at the twins. Lucy was whispering something to Nora, probably reassuring her that everything was fine. Probably lying, but that's what big sisters did. Protected the little ones from truths they weren't ready for. Because those women deserve better than being forgotten, Ethan said. Same as you did. Same as your daughters did. Abigail reached over and squeezed his arm. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. That night, after the girls were asleep, Abigail and Ethan sat on the porch while the stars came out. It was becoming a habit, these quiet conversations at the end of the day. Ethan had spent so many years avoiding human contact that he'd forgotten what it felt like to just sit with someone and talk, to have someone who wanted to hear what he thought, who shared pieces of themselves in return. It was strange, uncomfortable. He was starting to like it. I need to tell you something, Abigail said. All right. She took a breath, like she was working up courage. Conrad Voss didn't just ruin my life. He ruined my family. My whole family. What do you mean? My maiden name was Carter, Abigail Carter. Before I married, I had an older sister. She left home when I was 16, married a lawman from the next county over. I didn't see her much after that, just letters here and there. Then the letters stopped. Abigail's voice got quieter. I tried to find out what happened, asked around. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Finally, someone told me she died in childbirth, her and the baby both. But the way they said it, like there was more to the story they weren't telling me. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. What was your sister's name? Sarah Carter before she married. Why? He didn't answer right away. Couldn't. His throat had closed up and his hands were shaking and he had to grip the porch railing to keep himself steady. Sarah. Her name had been Sarah. Ethan? Abigail's voice was concerned now. What's wrong? Your sister, the lawman she married, what was his name? I don't know. She only mentioned him once or twice in her letters. Said he was a good man. Said she loved him. That's all I remember. Ethan closed his eyes. Did she ever mention where they lived? Some town north of here, I can't remember the name. Why are you asking me this? Because I think your sister was my wife. Abigail went completely still. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. That's not possible. Her maiden name was Carter. She died in childbirth 6 years ago. She had family somewhere south, a younger sister she talked about sometimes but never got to see. Ethan forced himself to look at Abigail. I didn't know her maiden name was Carter. She never talked much about her life before we met. But the pieces fit. But that would mean... Abigail's hand went to her mouth. We're family, you and me. We're related by marriage. Yeah. And you've been helping us this whole time without knowing. I didn't do it because we're family. I did it because it was right. Abigail laughed, but it came out broken. Do you know what this means? Voss didn't just take my husband and try to take my children. He destroyed both our families. He's the reason Sarah died. What? I found out later, the reason she died. It wasn't just childbirth. Voss had been pressuring your town, demanding payments from the merchants. Sarah got sick and you needed money for a doctor. You had to go collect those payments instead of staying with her. That's why you weren't there when she died. Ethan felt like he'd been shot again. All these years he'd blamed himself for choosing duty over family, for chasing some bank robber instead of being home where he belonged. But if what Abigail was saying was true, the rot went deeper. Voss's corruption had reached into Ethan's old life, had pulled him away from Sarah's bedside, had killed her as surely as if he'd pulled a trigger. How do you know this? Ethan asked. After my husband died, I started asking questions. Started trying to understand how Voss operated, how far his reach went. Someone told me about a lawman up north who'd lost his wife because he was too busy collecting Voss's debts to be home. They didn't mention your name, but the timing matched. I always wondered if it was true. Abigail's voice cracked. I'm so sorry. If I'd known Sarah was your wife, if I'd known you were out there alone all this time, you would have done what? You had your own grief, your own children to protect. You don't owe me anything. We're family. We're strangers who happen to share a dead woman we both loved. That's not the same thing. Abigail flinched like he'd slapped her. Ethan immediately regretted the words, but they were out now and he couldn't take them back. He stood up, his shoulders screaming at the sudden movement. I need to be alone for a while, he said. Ethan, please. He walked out into the dark, past the barn, past the fence line, out to the edge of his property where the land dropped away into a shallow valley. He stood there while the wind picked up and the temperature dropped, and his anger burned itself down to something colder and harder. Voss had taken everything. Not just Sarah and the baby. Not just Abigail's husband and nearly her daughters. He'd taken years, futures, the lives they all should have lived, and Ethan had killed him for it, but it didn't feel like enough. Death was too quick, too easy. Voss should have suffered, should have been made to answer for every life he'd ruined. But he was gone now, and the only thing left was the wreckage. Ethan didn't know how long he stood there before he heard footsteps behind him. Light ones. A child's. You're going to catch cold out here, Lucy said. So are you. Then we'll both be cold. She came and stood next to him, small and stubborn. Mama's crying. I know. You made her cry. I know that too. Are you going to say sorry? Ethan looked down at this little girl who'd somehow appointed herself his conscience. Yeah, I am. Good. Because she likes you. A lot. And when people like each other, they shouldn't make each other cry. It's not that simple. Why not? Because grown-up feelings are complicated. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Do you like her? I don't know. That's a lie. You do know. You're just scared to say it. Ethan couldn't help it. He laughed. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just weren't paying attention. Lucy grabbed his hand with both of hers. Come back inside. It's late and you're hurt, and Mama needs to check your bandages. In a minute? Now, before you do something stupid like decide to leave. What makes you think I'd leave? Because that's what scared people do. They run away. And right now, you look scared. She was right. He was terrified. The idea of letting these people in, of building something with them, of risking the kind of pain he'd felt when Sarah died. It was too much. Easier to keep his distance, easier to help them from arm's length, and then send them on their way once things settled down. But Lucy's small hand was warm in his, and she was pulling him back toward the house, and he found himself following. Abigail was sitting at the kitchen table when they came in, her eyes red but dry. Lucy gave Ethan a meaningful look and went to bed, leaving them alone. Ethan stood there awkward, trying to figure out how to apologize for something he wasn't sure he was sorry for. The words had been cruel, but they'd also been true. Or at least he'd thought they were. I shouldn't have said that, he started, about us being strangers. You were right, though. We don't really know each other. But we could, if we wanted to. Abigail looked up at him. Do you want to? I don't know. I spent 6 years convincing myself I was better off alone, that loving people only led to losing them. And then you and the girls showed up and turned everything upside down. We can leave, if that's what you need. No, that's not... Ethan sat down across from her. I killed the man who destroyed both our families. I should feel satisfied, vindicated, but I just feel empty. Like it doesn't matter that he's dead because the damage is already done. It does matter, Abigail said. Because of you, those girls are safe. Because of you, I'm free. Because of you, Voss can't hurt anyone else. That matters, Ethan, even if it doesn't fix what's broken. Does it fix anything for you? Some things, not others. She reached across the table and took his hand. But it's a start. And right now, a start is all I've got. Her hand was warm, calloused from work, trembling slightly. Ethan held it and felt something shift inside him. Not healing exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. Maybe the first small crack in the wall he'd spent so long building. I'm not good at this, he said. The being around people part. The caring about them part. You're doing fine. Lucy would disagree. Abigail smiled a little. Lucy has opinions about everything. Don't take it personally. They sat there in the lamplight, holding hands across the table like awkward teenagers, until Ethan's shoulders started throbbing again and Abigail insisted on changing his bandages. She worked gentle but efficient, cleaning the wound and wrapping fresh cloth. Her fingers brushed his skin and he flinched, not from pain but from how long it had been since someone touched him with kindness. You're healing well, she said. Another week or two and you'll barely feel it. I've had worse. That doesn't mean you should ignore it. She tied off the bandage and sat back. You're good at taking care of other people, Ethan, but you're terrible at taking care of yourself. Never saw much point in it. Well, start seeing one because those girls in there need you. And whether you like it or not, so do I. The next morning, Ethan rode to the nearest town with a telegraph office and sent a message to Federal Marshal James Garrett. He kept it short. Information about a criminal enterprise operating in the county, multiple kidnappings, corrupt local officials. He didn't mention Voss by name or the fact that the ringleader was already dead. Just enough to get Garrett interested. The reply came 2 days later. Garrett would arrive within the week to investigate. Ethan felt something like satisfaction reading those words. Voss might be gone, but his network wasn't. There were still men out there who'd helped him, still women who needed finding. Garrett would turn over every rock until he had answers. When Ethan got back to the ranch, he found the girls playing outside while Abigail hung laundry. It was such a normal scene, so domestic and ordinary, that it stopped him in his tracks. This was what life could be, not exciting or dangerous or filled with the kind of purpose he'd found wearing a badge. Just simple, peaceful, real. Lucy saw him first and came running. Did you send the letter? I did. The marshal's coming. Is he nice? He's fair. That's better than nice. Nora appeared from behind the barn, covered in dirt, holding something cupped in her hands. Look, I found a baby bird. She opened her hands and showed him a tiny sparrow, its feathers still downy, its eyes barely open, It chirped weakly. Fell out of its nest, Ethan said. Probably won't make it. We have to try to save it. Nora's eyes were huge. Please? We can feed it and keep it warm and… Nora, nature doesn't work that way. Sometimes things die and there's nothing you can do about it. But sometimes you can do something. You saved us. You can save this bird too. Ethan looked at this child, this little girl who'd been through hell and was still trying to save a fallen sparrow, and felt something break open in his chest. All right, he said. We'll try. Nora's face lit up like sunrise. She ran inside to find a box and some cloth to make a nest, Lucy trailing after her with suggestions. Abigail walked over, a basket of wet laundry on her hip. You know that bird's probably going to die, she said. Yeah. So why'd you say yes? Because she needed to hear it. Ethan watched the girls through the window, already arguing about what to feed their new charge. They've seen too much death. Let them try to save something, even if it doesn't work. You're a better man than you think you are. Or a weaker one. Same thing, sometimes. Over the next few days, the girls poured themselves into caring for that bird. They fed it mashed up worms and water from an eyedropper, kept it warm by the fire, took turns watching it through the night. Ethan tried to prepare them for the inevitable, tried to explain that wild things often died no matter what you did. But they wouldn't hear it. On the third day, the bird opened its eyes and chirped loud enough to be heard across the room. On the fourth day, it tried to hop. On the fifth day, it flew, just a few feet, just enough to reach the edge of the box, but it flew. I told you, Nora said triumphantly. I told you we could save it. Lucy was more practical. What do we do with it now? We can't keep it in a box forever. We let it go, Ethan said. Set it free. That's what you do when something's healed. The girls took the bird outside and Nora opened her hands. The sparrow sat there for a moment, confused, then spread its wings and flew up into the cottonwood tree. They watched it disappear into the leaves, and Nora started crying. Hey, Ethan said, kneeling beside her. Why the tears? You saved it. I know, but now it's gone. That's what saving something means. You make it strong enough to leave. I didn't want it to leave. I wanted it to stay. Ethan understood that feeling better than he could say. The wanting to hold on to something, to keep it close and safe. The fear that letting go meant losing it forever. He'd felt that way about Sarah, felt that way about the life he'd built before grief tore it down. And he was starting to feel that way about these three people who'd crashed into his world and refused to leave. Sometimes, he said carefully, the things we save don't leave. Sometimes they choose to stay, but they have to know they can leave if they want to. Otherwise, it's not really saving them. It's just trapping them different. Nora wiped her eyes. Do you think it'll come back? Maybe, if it wants to. She seemed satisfied with that answer and ran off to help Lucy with the chickens. Abigail joined Ethan by the tree, watching the girls work. That was good, she said. What you told her? Just the truth. Still good. She hesitated, then said, Marshal Garrett arrives tomorrow. What are you going to tell him? Everything I know, names, dates, places. He'll want to talk to you too, and probably the girls. They've been through enough. I know, but their testimony matters. They saw things, heard things, and Garrett needs all of it if he's going to build a case. Abigail nodded slowly. Will we be safe after we talk? Safer than you were before. Once this goes official, once there's federal attention on it, the men who worked with Voss will scatter. They'll be too busy protecting themselves to come after you. And what about us? After all this is done, after the marshal finishes his investigation, what happens then? Ethan knew what she was really asking. Whether they'd stay. Whether this temporary arrangement would become something permanent. Whether the family they'd accidentally built together had a future. I don't know, he said honestly. I haven't thought that far ahead. Maybe you should start. She went inside, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the sound of the girls laughing in the yard. Ethan stood there, watching them, and tried to imagine what came next. Tried to picture a future that included more than just him and his ghosts. It was hard. Felt like trying to see through fog, but for the first time in 6 years, he wanted to try. Marshal Garrett arrived the next afternoon riding a gray horse and wearing the same stern expression Ethan remembered from their lawman days. He was older now, grayer, with lines around his eyes that spoke of too many years chasing bad men across hard country. But when he saw Ethan, his face split into a rare smile. "Mercer, heard you quit the life." "I did, 6 years ago. Yet here you are, sending me telegraphs about criminal conspiracies." Garrett dismounted and shook Ethan's hand. "Some men can't leave the work behind." "This wasn't work. This was personal. Always is." Garrett looked past him at the ranch, taking in the repaired bullet holes, the scorch marks, the general air of a place that had recently seen violence. "Looks like you had yourself quite a time." "You could say that." They went inside and Ethan introduced Garrett to Abigail and the girls. The marshal was gentle with them, his stern face softening when he spoke to the twins. He asked them questions about what they'd seen, what they remembered, writing everything down in a small leather notebook. Lucy answered clear and direct. Nora hesitated more, sometimes crying, but she got through it. When he'd heard enough, Garrett closed his notebook and looked at Ethan. "This is bigger than I thought. If what you're telling me is true, Voss had connections in 4 counties. Maybe more. We're talking judges, sheriffs, land office clerks, whole network of corruption. Can you take it down?" "I can try, but I'll need cooperation from locals. And if they were all on Voss's payroll, that's going to be hard to get. Sheriff Dawes wasn't just on the payroll. He was Voss's main man in town. You pressure him right, he'll fold, give you names to save himself." Garrett smiled without humor. "Then I guess I'll be having a conversation with Sheriff Dawes." He stayed for dinner, swapping stories with Ethan about the old days while the girls listened wide-eyed. After the meal, he pulled Ethan aside. "I meant what I said. This is going to be a long investigation. Months, probably. Maybe longer. You and Mrs. Hart and the girls, you'll need to testify when it goes to trial. You prepared for that?" "We'll do what needs doing." "Good. Because the men who worked with Voss, they're not going to take this lying down. Once they realize there's a federal investigation, they might come after the witnesses. Try to intimidate them, silence them." "Let them try." Garrett studied him. "You've changed, Ethan. 6 years ago, you would have just arrested them and let the law handle it. Now you look like you're ready to shoot first and skip the arresting part." 6 years ago, I believed the law could fix things. Now I know better. The law's not perfect, but it's what we've got. Then it better work this time, because I'm done watching guilty men walk free while good people suffer. Garrett clapped him on the shoulder. "I'll do my best. That's all I can promise." He left early the next morning, riding south toward town to start rattling cages and asking uncomfortable questions. Ethan watched him go and felt a weight lift slightly. This was out of his hands now. He'd done his part. The rest was up to Garrett and whatever passed for justice in this corner of the territory. The weeks that followed were strange, quiet in a way the ranch hadn't been since the girls arrived. They fell into a routine, Ethan working the land, Abigail managing the house, the twins doing whatever small tasks they could to help. It felt almost normal, almost like a real family. But there were cracks, moments when Ethan would catch himself pulling away, retreating into old habits of silence and solitude. Moments when Abigail would look at him like she was trying to figure out if he was going to stay or disappear. Moments when the girls would ask questions about the future and Ethan wouldn't have answers. Then one evening, Lucy asked the question that changed everything. "Are you our daddy now?" They were sitting at dinner, the 4 of them crowded around the table. The question just came out of nowhere, hanging in the air like smoke. Nora looked up from her plate, eyes wide. Abigail went very still. "What makes you ask that?" Ethan said carefully. "Because you act like a daddy. You protect us and take care of us and teach us things. Mama says that's what daddies do. Your daddy was a good man. I'm not trying to replace him. I know. But he's gone. And you're here. So I was just wondering." Ethan looked at Abigail, saw something hopeful and terrified in her eyes. Looked at Nora, who was holding her breath waiting for his answer. Looked at Lucy, who'd asked the question like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know," he said finally. "I'm not very good at being anyone's daddy." "You're good at being ours," Nora said quietly. And just like that, the wall Ethan had spent 6 years building started to crumble. Not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly, like water wearing down stone. He felt it happening and knew he should stop it, should shore up his defenses before he got hurt again. but he was tired of defending himself against people who only wanted to care about him. "Yeah," he said, "maybe I am." Lucy smiled, satisfied, and went back to eating. Like it was settled, like he'd just agreed to something permanent and binding without really understanding what he'd signed up for. Maybe he had. That night, after the girls were asleep, Abigail found him on the porch again. She'd brought whiskey this time, 2 glasses. They drank in silence for a while. "They love you," she said eventually. "You know that, right? They barely know me. They know enough. They know you saved them. They know you stayed when you could have sent us away. They know you're good and decent and broken in all the same ways they are." Abigail took a sip of her whiskey. "That's enough for children. They don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be there." "And what about you? What do you need?" She turned to look at him, and in the lamplight she was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Not the kind of beautiful that came from being young or untouched by life. The kind that came from surviving, from being worn down and still standing. "I need to know if you're going to keep running," she said. "Because I can't build a life on maybe. The girls can't. We need to know if you're in this or if we should start planning for what comes after." "What if I don't know yet?" "Then figure it out. Because we can't stay in this limbo forever." She went inside, leaving Ethan alone with the night and his whiskey and the question he'd been avoiding since the day he found those girls in that shack. What did he want? He'd spent 6 years wanting nothing except to be left alone. 6 years convinced that caring about people only led to pain. And maybe that was true. Maybe loving someone was just setting yourself up to lose them. But the alternative, this half-life he'd been living, this careful distance from anything that mattered, was that really better? Ethan finished his whiskey and made a decision. The decision didn't come with lightning or revelation. It came quiet, like the sun rising. Inevitable, gentle, something you couldn't stop even if you wanted to. Ethan sat on that porch until his glass was empty and the stars had wheeled halfway across the sky. And somewhere in all that silence, he realized he'd already made his choice. Had probably made it the moment he kicked open that shack door and saw 2 starving children who needed him. He just hadn't admitted it yet. The next morning, Ethan found Abigail in the kitchen kneading bread dough, her hands working the flour with a rhythm that spoke of years doing this same task. The girls were outside feeding the chickens, their voices carrying through the open window. Ethan stood in the doorway watching Abigail work, trying to find the right words for what he needed to say. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "I made a decision." Her hand stilled. "About? About what you asked me last night, about whether I'm in this or not." Abigail set the dough down and turned to face him, wiping flour from her hands. Her expression was carefully neutral, like she was bracing for bad news. "And? I'm in, if you'll have me. All of you." Something flickered across her face, relief, hope, fear all tangled together. "You're sure? Because the girls have already lost one father. I won't let them lose another because you changed your mind 6 months from now. I'm not going anywhere." "You say that now." "I mean it." Ethan stepped closer. "I spent 6 years convinced I was better off alone, that caring about people only led to losing them. And you know what? I was right. Loving someone does open you up to loss, but not loving them, living like I was already dead, that's worse. That's not protecting yourself. That's just giving up." Abigail's eyes were bright now, tears threatening. "So what changed?" "You did. Those girls did. You showed up and reminded me what it felt like to be alive, to have something worth fighting for, worth staying for." He reached out, hesitant, and took her hand. "I can't promise I'll be good at this. I'll probably mess up more than I get right. But I'm done running from the only good thing that's happened to me in 6 years. She pulled her hand free, and for a moment Ethan thought he'd read this wrong, thought she was going to tell him it was too late. They'd already decided to leave. Then she grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him close and kissed him hard enough to make his head spin. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. "You're an idiot for taking this long to figure it out." "Yeah, I know. But you're our idiot now. I can live with that." The girls came running in then, Nora holding 2 eggs carefully in her apron, Lucy talking a mile a minute about the rooster chasing her around the yard. They stopped short when they saw Ethan and Abigail standing close together, saw their mother's tears and Ethan's crooked smile. "What happened?" Lucy asked, suspicious. "Ethan's staying. Abigail said. For good. Nora dropped both eggs. They hit the floor with a wet crack, yolk spreading across the boards. But she didn't care. She ran at Ethan full speed and wrapped her arms around his waist, squeezing hard enough to make his still healing shoulder protest. Lucy joined her a second later, and then Abigail, and they stood there in the middle of the kitchen, covered in flour and broken egg, and holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in a spinning world. Does this mean you're really our daddy now? Nora asked, her voice muffled against Ethan's shirt. If you want me to be. I want you to be. Lucy pulled back enough to look up at him. What about Mama? Are you going to marry her? Ethan glanced at Abigail, who'd gone very still. We haven't talked about that yet. Why not? You love her, don't you? Lucy, Abigail said, her face flushing. That's not appropriate. Do you? Lucy pressed, ignoring her mother. Ethan could have deflected, could have told her it was complicated, that grown-up feelings didn't work that simply. But she'd asked him straight, and she deserved a straight answer. Yeah, he said, I do. Abigail made a small sound, half laugh and half sob. Lucy looked satisfied. Nora just squeezed tighter. Then you should marry her, Lucy declared. That's what people do when they love each other. Again, Ethan said, not that simple. Why not? Because marriage is a big decision. It's not something you rush into. You've known each other for weeks. How much longer do you need? Abigail laughed for real this time. She has a point. You're not helping. I'm not trying to. Abigail stepped back, composing herself. But for the record, if you did ask, I'd say yes. The words hung there, simple and terrifying and perfect. Ethan looked at this woman who'd survived hell and come out stronger, at these two girls who'd decided he was worth loving despite all evidence to the contrary, and felt the last piece of his broken heart click back into place. Then I'm asking, he said. Now? Abigail's eyes went wide. Right here in the kitchen covered in flour with egg on the floor? Why not? We're already a family. Might as well make it official. She stared at him for a long moment, then smiled so bright it hurt to look at. Yes, of course yes. The girls started screaming, jumping up and down, already making plans for a wedding. Ethan pulled Abigail close again and kissed her properly this time, slow and gentle, sealing a promise he intended to keep for the rest of his life. News of Marshall Garrett's investigation spread fast. Within 2 weeks, 3 county sheriffs had resigned under pressure. Within a month, a circuit judge was arrested for accepting bribes. The network Voss had built started to unravel, thread by thread, as men scrambled to save themselves by turning on each other. Garrett sent regular updates. More arrests, more confessions, more women found alive and returned to their families. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to matter. The trial started in late summer. Ethan, Abigail, and the girls traveled to the territorial capital to testify. It took 3 days of questioning, of reliving everything that happened, of facing down the remaining men who'd worked with Voss, and listening to their lawyers try to paint Ethan as a vigilante and Abigail as a liar. But the evidence was overwhelming. The testimonies of rescued women, the financial records Garrett had seized, the confessions of lesser criminals trying to cut deals. When the verdicts came down, guilty, 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 across the board, Ethan felt something release in his chest that had been locked tight since the night Voss died. Not satisfaction exactly, not closure, but acknowledgement. The world had looked at what happened and said, yes, this was wrong, these men will pay. It wouldn't bring back the years, wouldn't undo the damage, but it was something. They got married in September under the cottonwood trees by the creek. Nothing fancy, just a traveling preacher, a few neighbors, Marshall Garrett standing up as Ethan's witness. Lucy and Nora wore new dresses Abigail had sewn, their hair done up with ribbons. Abigail wore a simple white dress she'd borrowed from Pete Morrison's wife, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Ethan wore his one good suit, the one he'd packed away 6 years ago and never thought he'd need again. When the preacher asked if he took this woman, Ethan looked at Abigail and saw his whole future in her eyes. Saw mornings waking up next to her, saw teaching the girls to ride, to shoot, to survive in this hard country. Saw growing old together, weathering whatever storms came, building a life from the ruins of their old ones. I do, he said, and meant it down to his bones. The kiss that followed was chaste, appropriate for the audience, but it carried the promise of more, of nights by the fire and shared secrets and the slow building of trust between two people who'd both been broken and were learning how to be whole again. The girls cheered, the neighbors clapped. Marshall Garrett looked pleased with himself, like he'd somehow orchestrated this entire thing. Maybe he had, in a way. If he hadn't come when Ethan called, if he hadn't taken down Voss's network, they might still be looking over their shoulders, waiting for the next attack. The celebration was simple. Food, music from a neighbor's fiddle, dancing in the yard as the sun set. Ethan wasn't much of a dancer, but Abigail didn't seem to mind his awkward steps. She just laughed when he stepped on her feet and showed him the rhythm until he got it mostly right. The girls spun in circles until they were dizzy, then collapsed in the grass giggling. Later, when the guests had gone and the girls were asleep, Ethan and Abigail stood on the porch watching the stars. She leaned against him, her head on his good shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her waist. "You happy?" he asked. "More than I thought possible. You?" "Yeah, scared as hell, but happy." "What are you scared of?" "Messing this up, letting you down, letting the girls down." Abigail tilted her head to look at him. "You know what I've learned? Loving someone doesn't mean being perfect for them. It means staying even when things get hard, especially when things get hard. You've already proven you can do that. I ran once. After Sarah died, I could run again. But you won't. Because you're not the same man who ran 6 years ago. You've changed. We all have." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, where would you go? This is your home. We're your home." She was right. The ranch wasn't just a place anymore. It was Lucy teaching Nora how to gather eggs without scaring the chickens. It was Abigail humming while she cooked. It was the sound of laughter and arguments and life being lived messy and loud and real. He couldn't run from that. Didn't want to. "Yeah," he said, "you are." The years that followed weren't easy. The frontier never was. There were droughts that killed crops and winters that killed livestock. There were accidents and sickness and all the normal hardships of trying to survive in a place that didn't care whether you made it or not. But they made it together, the four of them, building something solid out of shared grief and stubborn hope. Lucy grew tall and sharp-tongued, inheriting her mother's steel and Ethan's steady aim. She could outshoot most men by the time she was 12 and wasn't shy about proving it. Nora stayed softer, drawn to growing things, turning the land around the house into a garden that bloomed even in the hardest seasons. She had a gift for coaxing life from dirt, for seeing potential where others saw only rocks and dust. Ethan taught them everything he knew: how to track game, how to read weather, how to defend themselves if trouble came calling, how to be strong without being cruel, how to survive without losing the parts of themselves worth keeping. Abigail taught them the rest: how to cook and sew and manage a household, how to read and write and do figures, how to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. They fought sometimes, the way all families do. Lucy's stubbornness clashed with Ethan's, leading to shouting matches that usually ended with both of them apologizing. Nora went through a phase where she barely spoke to anyone, lost in her own head. Abigail and Ethan had their own struggles, learning how to be married after years of being alone, figuring out how to merge two broken lives into something whole. But they worked through it. That was the difference between this family and the one Ethan had lost. When Sarah died, he'd let the grief swallow him whole, had given up without fighting. This time, when things got hard, he stayed. He fought. He showed up every day and did the work of being a husband and father, even when he didn't know what he was doing, even when he got it wrong. Because that's what love was, he realized. Not the absence of pain or fear or failure, just the commitment to stay anyway, to keep trying, to believe that what you were building together was worth the effort. 10 years after the night Ethan found them in that shack, Lucy got married to a young rancher from the next county. Ethan walked her down the aisle, and when he handed her over, she whispered, "Thank you for coming back for us." It took him a moment to understand. She was talking about that first night, when he could have left them in the shack, could have ridden past and pretended he'd seen nothing, could have saved himself all this trouble and heartache and joy. "Best decision I ever made," he said, and kissed her forehead. Nora stayed closer to home, eventually taking over most of the ranch work as Ethan's joints started to ache and his eyesight got fuzzy. She was good at it, better than Ethan had been, turning the struggling ranch into something profitable. She never married, seemed content with the land and her garden and the occasional visits from Lucy's growing family. Ethan and Abigail grew old together the way they'd hoped, slow and stubborn, fighting time every step of the way. His shoulder never did heal right, leaving him with a constant ache that got worse when it rained. Abigail's hands twisted with arthritis, making the fine sewing she loved harder each year. But they managed. They always managed. They never talked much about the early days, about Voss and the violence and how close they'd come to losing everything. Those memories were there, scars that never quite faded, but they didn't define them. What defined them was what came after. The choice to build instead of break. The choice to love despite knowing it meant risking loss. The choice to stay. Ethan died on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, 3 months past his 73rd birthday. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, just his heart finally giving out after decades of hard use. He was sitting on the porch with Abigail, watching Nora work in the garden, when he felt a tightness in his chest and knew. "Abigail," he said quietly. She looked at him and knew too, saw it in his face. "Don't you dare." "Not much choice in it." "I'm not ready. Neither am I." He took her hand, held it tight. "But we knew this was coming eventually." "That doesn't make it easier?" "No, it doesn't." Nora saw them from the garden and came running. Lucy arrived an hour later, her husband driving the wagon hard to get her there in time. They gathered around Ethan on the porch, this family he'd built from nothing, and he looked at each of them in turn. Lucy, fierce and strong, still that little girl who'd trusted him to save her sister. Nora, gentle and growing things, still trying to save every fallen sparrow. Abigail, the love of his second life, the woman who taught him it was possible to heal. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice getting weaker. "After I'm gone, I want you to put something on my grave." "Daddy, don't!" Nora's voice broke. "Listen, it's important." He looked at Lucy. "Remember what you said at your wedding about me coming back for you?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Put that on the stone. He came back for us. That's how I want to be remembered. Not as the man I was before, not as the lawman or the widower or any of that. As the man who came back." "We will," Lucy promised. "We'll put it on there." Ethan smiled, satisfied. The pain in his chest was getting worse now, spreading, but he wasn't scared. He'd been scared of dying for years, scared of what came after, scared of losing everything again. But looking at these three faces, seeing the life they'd built together, he realized death wasn't the ending he'd feared. It was just the last part of a story that had started with 2 frozen children in a shack and ended with more love than he'd ever thought possible. "Thank you," he said, to all of them and none of them, "for letting me stay." Then he closed his eyes and the pain eased and he felt Sarah's hand in his, gentle and familiar, welcoming him home. But when he looked back one last time, he saw Abigail and the girls still holding on, still there on the porch where he'd spent so many evenings watching the stars and counting his blessings. And he knew they'd be okay, because he'd taught them how to survive, how to stay, how to love despite the cost, how to come back for the people who mattered. The funeral was held 3 days later under those same cottonwood trees where he'd married Abigail. Half the county turned up, neighbors, old friends, people whose lives had been changed by the domino effect of Ethan taking down Voss's network. Marshall Garrett came, older now and retired, but still sharp enough to remember the man Ethan had been and honor the man he'd become. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch where he could see the land he'd worked and the house he'd filled with life. The stone was simple granite, weathered to last, carved with the words Lucy had promised. Ethan Mercer, 1803 to 1876. He came back for us. Lucy read something she'd written, her voice steady despite the tears. Nora planted wildflowers around the grave, the kind that would come back every spring without needing tending. Abigail just stood there, one hand on the stone, saying goodbye to the second great love of her life. Later, after everyone had gone and the sun was setting, the 3 of them stood together looking at the grave. "Do you think he's with Sarah now?" Nora asked. "Maybe," Abigail said. "I like to think so." "Does that make you sad? That he might have loved her more?" "No, because I think he loved us differently, not less. Sarah was his first love. We were his second chance. Both matter. Both shaped who he was. Lucy reached over and took her mother's hand. "Are you going to be okay?" "Eventually. Right now it hurts too much to think about. But I've survived worse. We all have." They stood there until the stars came out, three women bound together by a man who'd learned to love again when he thought he'd forgotten how. Then they walked back to the house, to the life that would continue without him, but because of him, carrying forward everything he'd taught them about staying and fighting and choosing hope over despair. Years passed. Decades. The ranch changed hands but stayed in the family, worked by Lucy's children and then their children. The story of Ethan Mercer became family legend. The broken widower who found two dying children and chose to save them, who took on a corrupt land baron and won, who learned it was never too late to build something good from ruins. The grave on the hill became a place where family gathered, where children asked questions about the grandfather or great-grandfather they'd never met, where the old story was told again and again until it wore smooth with repetition. But the core of it never changed. He came back for us. 4 words that meant everything. Not just about that first night in the shack, but about every day after. Every time things got hard and he could have run but didn't. Every time fear whispered that loving people only led to pain and he loved them anyway. Every time the past tried to drag him down and he chose the present instead. He came back, and in doing so, he taught everyone who came after him the most important lesson there was. That broken things could be fixed, that lost people could be found, that it was never too late to choose a different path. That the worst thing that ever happened to you didn't have to define the rest of your life. That sometimes, when you least expected it, you got a second chance. And what mattered wasn't whether you deserved it, but what you did with it. Ethan Mercer had been given a second chance in the form of 2 starving children and their desperate mother. He could have squandered it, could have sent them away and gone back to his comfortable isolation. Instead, he'd grabbed it with both hands and held on tight, building a family from shared trauma and stubborn refusal to give up. He'd stayed when staying was hard. He'd loved when loving felt impossible. He'd come back again and again for the people who needed him. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The ranch still stands, over a century later, maintained by descendants who know the story by heart. The grave on the hill is still there, the carved words weathered but readable. Tourists sometimes stop to take pictures, drawn by the simple poetry of that epitaph and the story behind it. But the real legacy isn't the ranch or the grave or even the story. It's the lesson that every person who hears it takes away, that you're never too broken to be fixed, never too lost to be found, never too far gone to come back. That family isn't just blood, it's choice. That love doesn't erase pain, but it makes pain bearable. That the worst night of your life might be the prelude to the best years. That when you find people worth saving, you save them, and then you let them save you back. He came back for us. In the end, those 4 words on a weathered stone say everything that needs saying about how to live a life worth remembering. Not perfectly, not without mistakes or regrets or moments of doubt, just with commitment, with stubborn refusal to give up on the people who matter, with love.